this chilly night. I'm happy to see that we all have power and are able to be here. I was telling them before that the snow is a lot nicer to look at when you can come inside and be warm instead of having no power. So can you all see my screen all right? Okay, awesome. We use a program that doesn't allow us to really kind of make this into a PowerPoint. So I'll scroll. So I apologize. You kind of get the preview slides on the left-hand side. There's no way for me to hide that. But really excited to be here with you all tonight, and so grateful that our clinical director for Texas, Ann Matino, could be with me. This presentation really is meant to be one of those presentations that leaves you thinking. Our goal with this is that we have a conversation, we plant the seed, and that we can start thinking about how we may prioritize mental health given just our society we live in, right? So I don't think we're going to say anything too revolutionary. At least I know I won't, and probably will. But it's the way we are packaging all of this together that is going to make all of us think about how we can make change in our own community. So that is the goal of the presentation. The agenda is we're going to do some quick introductions. Anne is going to help us kind of get our minds right to absorb this information. I'm going to go over some mental health statistics. Some of them are pretty grim, but I think it's important to shed a light on what we're dealing with at a national level, and specifically here in Texas. We are going to talk about levels of care in mental health, and I'll share a little bit about the work we do at Charlie Health, some common stressors that are felt in high school and post-secondary life, and then Anne is going to really dig into the power of connection and tools that we can teach our youth. And Anne, if you want to introduce yourself.
Oh, well, here I am. So I'm a licensed clinical social worker, and I've been around for a while. I love Charlie Health. I love helping teens and young adults, and just happy to be here today with you guys. That's it. I've been around the block. I've worked at psychiatric hospitals for a lot of my years. I've worked in residential treatment, in intensive outpatient programs, which is what we do at Charlie Health, in a number of different states, and just happy to be here with you tonight.
Thanks, Anne. Mm-hmm. And I kind of come to the group with a little bit of an educator hat. So as Athena said, my name's Guion. I am one of 4 directors of clinical outreach here in the state of Texas for Charlie Health. I actually spent the last 10 years in education. I'm a trained school counselor, and I've worked most of my adult life in alternative school settings. Usually, most of the students I've worked with in the last 10 years came to where I used to work because a crisis happened. So I really saw that intersection of school and mental health. And what I always heard parents say was, gosh, I wish we would have intervened sooner. But this happened and this happened. And that's really the message I want to bring here, is just what I have learned in those past 10 years and what we're doing at Charlie Health, and how that can be really a resource for so much of the community. So, Anne, if you want to kick us off.
Sure. So I am just huge about talking to people about protective factors. And a lot of people haven't heard exactly what that means, but it's really someone in your life who has shown you that you're worthy, has shown you that they can see you and they can hear you. And a lot of the kids today, young adults and teenagers, feel as though they're lonely and isolated. A protective factor can be a cafeteria worker, it can be a janitor, it can be anyone who shows you that they treat you with respect, because what that does is it correlates directly in studies to resilience. People who have protective factors are more resilient in their lives. So we know that we're going to go through a lot of hard things in our lives. Are we going to be able to get through it though? And what is our resilience going to look like? So protective factors, unfortunately, sometimes aren't parents, but they're all of you when you talk about mental health and the ways that you tell your stories and the ways that you support other people. So they remind kids that they're important, and that directly relates to resilience. So the whole oxygen thing on the plane, right? Before you can take care of other people, you have to take care of yourself. And that is something that we struggle with, I think, as professionals in the caring field, as well as what you all do in terms of in your communities for NAMI, as parents, as grandparents, whatever your roles are, is taking care of others first. And I just wanted to stress that we really at Charlie Health are very focused on taking care of each other as staff people. And so we do things like we have yoga for the staff. For full-time folks at Charlie Health, they get $100 a month to do something like getting a massage or taking care of yourself. So we try to practice what we preach. And so just wanted to say that to all of you, that you're caretakers, and you deserve to take care of yourself as well. And there's just a couple of apps here that help with self-care. I haven't done Headspace or Calm, but I'm a big fan of Insight Timer. Totally free app. It has so many thousands of meditations, calming music. You can set it for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, a half an hour. You can go through and find people that their voice is very soothing to you. Sometimes voices aren't. Don't listen to them if you're like, but you can do guided meditations or just listen to the ocean. All of those things are available for free, and Calm and Headspace are similar to those. So just wanted to let you know those are free options for you to be able to relax and take care of yourself, even if it's just for a few moments.
Thanks, Ann.
Mm-hmm. So
now that we've talked a little bit about self-care, hopefully you can take that throughout the journey of this presentation, because this is where, unfortunately, the statistics aren't really great, right? I think all of us know collectively over the last couple of years, a lot of people have collectively struggled. What's interesting in the data is it really shows the discrepancies between various populations of individuals and how suicide rates have increased and how we've responded. But I think it's important to show because I think a great thing that has come out of the last couple of years is the stigma around mental health is getting better. I would say more and more people are talking about counseling than ever before. Schools are focused on social emotional learning than ever before. But the truth of the matter is there's huge pockets of the population that still don't have access to the right level of care. And we know that therapy sometimes takes more than once a week. And while our society is really focused on this idea of seeking therapy, I think it leaves a huge population of people who do the once a week therapy and it's not enough. And so we're here to educate you all on the various levels of care, but that it does take time, and how can we prioritize that? And we need to because of these statistics. So we can see that huge increase in adolescent girls in particular, whereas in comparison, only 4% for boys. I think that's interesting. I think all of us can probably point to maybe why that might be the case. I think social media definitely plays a part in it. I was talking to an orthodontist actually a few weeks ago. I never thought I'd have to outreach to an orthodontist for mental health support, but he was sharing that he is having more and more youth come in asking to change their jawline to match Instagram filters. So, just things to be aware of. We're all struggling with how we compare to others, and especially our youth. But one of the things that I saw on this that was really alarming to me was that from 2009 to 2019, the proportion of high school students reporting persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness increased by 40%. I actually did this presentation to a group of school counselors yesterday. Gosh, it felt like last week, but it was yesterday. And, a lot of them were sharing that this number actually felt pretty low, given the state that they're seeing their students coming into their offices. And the plan for creating a suicide plan has increased by 44%. So our youth are sick, right? They're needing support. I think all of us know that low income adults are probably the most underrepresented. There's not enough resources for them. They're more than twice likely to have a mental illness and anxiety as depression compared to their higher income individuals. So as a society, we have a lot to do in terms of really addressing mental health across the board. One of the things we're going to talk about when we're talking about an overscheduled life is really how much does a child need to do in elementary and middle school and high school with this goal of going off to college, right? As a society, we really spend a lot of time talking about AP classes, sports, boosting up our resume to get to this end goal of going to college, picking a career, having a happy life. And we know that's not always the case, right? There's lots of different ways to get to that. There's lots of different ways to have success as an adult. And what we know is that if we can intervene earlier in high school, give the kiddos the right support, the right mental health support that they need, hopefully these numbers will decrease, because unfortunately, more and more young people are dropping out of college due to mental health concerns. So around 2/3 of 64% of college students in the US quit their studies because of mental health disorders. What's really sad is 50% of those who dropped out didn't have access to mental health services. And 1/5 of students who drop out of college because of depression say they would have stayed in school if proper treatment would have been provided. And I really want to highlight that idea of proper treatment, because that's what we're going to go into next. Like I mentioned, I think more and more people are talking about the idea of outpatient therapy, right? Seeing a counselor once a week. But for a lot of people, that's not enough. And we're often not intervening in the ways that we should between once a week therapy and full-blown crisis. And I think a lot of these young people don't know what's out there, right? They may be seeing a once a week therapist. It's not enough. There may be part of a long wait list at their college counseling office because that's all they know, and it's not enough. So really educating the community on what does levels of mental health care look like. So I'm going to educate you all. So some of this may be something you know. I'm going to talk a little bit about how Charlie Health plays a role in this as well. But essentially, these are the levels of mental health care. What is fascinating is I want you to think of if you broke your arm, right? If you broke your arm, you'd go to the emergency room. You would, get a cast. And then odds are you would probably have some physical therapy. You would have some routine visits back with your doctor. You wouldn't just go home and saw the cast off yourself and go on with your life. But in many ways, that's kind of how we approach mental health, especially when individuals land themselves in inpatient level of care. So inpatient is what it sounds like, right? A crisis has happened. A young person, an adult has found themselves in a hospital setting. And so that could be due to a mental health crisis, a suicide attempt, suicidal ideation. And the goal of that inpatient stay is stabilization. In most cases, those hospital stays are going to be, 4, 7, 10 days. And the goal is to get that individual stable. Now, best case scenario is that they would then go down this pyramid. They may go to, let's skip residential, because I'll talk a little bit about that later, but maybe let's do like a partial hospitalization program or an intensive outpatient program like Charlie Health, and then step down to outpatient therapy. But what we know and why Charlie Health was actually created is that huge pockets of the United States actually don't have access to intensive outpatient and partial hospitalization levels of care. They don't exist, especially for some populations like Medicaid. And so what happens is you have this inpatient level of care, you stabilize, and you get sent home to maybe a once a week therapist, or maybe a long wait list, or maybe a psychiatrist. And unfortunately, what we're seeing more and more across the country is these individuals cycle back through that hospital. So they skip all these middle steps and they just go back and forth. And there's a lot of failure around that, right? Like people will feel like, gosh, this level of care wasn't enough for me, I failed. And what we really want to get the message out is it may just not have been the right level of care. You may just need more than what you were given. I struggled, and I'm sorry, I think there may be a question. Okay, perfect. Yeah, feel free, unmute yourself at any point if you have questions throughout. Happy to make this a dialogue. This next piece is residential level of care. I struggled with which one to put first, because I also think that this tends to be a little bit high acuity, but residential level of care is what it sounds like. The individual is living there. It could be a mental health primary. It could be a substance use residential program. It could be a therapeutic boarding school. There are wilderness programs out there, but essentially that person is there at that program, usually from anywhere from 30 days. There are some therapeutic boarding schools individuals are at for a year plus. So it really depends. The unfortunate part is a lot of residential care is not easily accessible to a large portion of the population. Cost typically is pretty high. Insurance typically doesn't pay very well. So there is some barriers to accessing this level of care, but it does exist, and there's great programs all throughout the country. Next down our list is a partial hospitalization, or what's sometimes called a day treatment. So really, this is still an intensive level of treatment. The difference is you're not staying the night at the hospital. So a lot of hospitals where individuals find themselves at for inpatient stays will also then have a partial hospitalization program for that individual to step down. Usually it's 6 to 8 hours per day. That individual will then go home and sleep and come back the next day. It's usually 5 days a week. For adolescents, they're usually unenrolled from their current school and doing some type of charter school or educational component throughout their day. And usually there's psychiatric care as part of it. And then there's intensive outpatient program, which is what Charlie Health is. And so what is great about intensive outpatient programming is it's a little less intensive than partial hospitalization. It's typically 3 days a week. It's usually about 11 hours at a time. And I'll tell you a little bit more about specifically what we do. But it really combines group, family, and individual therapy. What I think most people don't understand is it can be a really great tool when outpatient therapy isn't working as a level up, rather than hospital stay and then stepping down into intensive outpatient programming. What I would love to see more parents do is realize, gosh, my kiddo's struggling and the once a week therapy is not working, and we really want to supercharge healing. That's how I kind of think of an intensive outpatient program. It's intensive because it is multiple hours a week. It's usually a 6 to 8 week long sprint, but it really is the ability to supercharge that healing and connect people with others who are dealing with similar situations. And I'll share a little bit more about that later. And then there's traditional therapy, which all of us know it's, you're once a week, maybe you're twice a week, seeing your psychiatrist, maybe some group therapy. And this is great. I think the fact that we're talking more about this in the news and the media and on social media is great. But I would love to see people educate themselves more on the various levels of care so that they know when to advocate for themselves and their families. Any questions about levels of care? Anything you want to add, Anne?
No, great job.
So the title of our talk is, prioritizing mental health in an overscheduled culture. And overscheduled is something I think all of us can feel, whether we're parents, we're educators, we're professionals. I think it's safe to say our society values busy, right? I think we often correlate the busier you are, the more successful you'll be. The busier you are, the more money you'll make. And I think we teach our youth that a lot. But unfortunately, what that often leads to, especially in the high school years, is that we often see families waiting until crisis to seek those higher levels of care. It's often not a proactive step, right? We hear a lot from parents. Some common things are, well, we can't devote 11 hours a week to therapy because sports are starting, or it's easier. Let's wait until, summer when school is not as much of a stressor. And what we know is if a child is depressed today and anxious about school, odds are that anxiety and depression are just going to get worse throughout the year. And so why not carve that time away? Why not talk to the school about, lessening a burden? Why not delete a sport for a semester? There's ways that we can prioritize this. And what was always, and I know parents mean the best. I'm a parent myself. But it was always fascinating when I would hear parents come to us and be willing to drop an activity or be willing to work around their schedule to add things like extra tutoring or something that would boost their child's college resume. And what we just saw with the statistics in post-secondary data is just because a child is really successful in high school and really good at getting good grades and being busy, that doesn't necessarily mean that they have the tools to be successful in their post-secondary life, especially if they're struggling with their mental health. So what can we really do to be proactive with giving our youth the tools they need and making sure that they're in the right level of care so that they have those skills when they go off to their post-secondary life?
And I think, I just wanted to add something. I talked to Gyan the other day about this. The way that I look at this is that there's a foundation of mental health and stability that all kids have. And if there's bricks missing in that foundation and we're just piling more bricks on top of it to build the house of what they're supposed to be, they're supposed to do well in school, you're supposed to go to college, et cetera, there's going to be a point where that it doesn't stand. The house isn't going to stand. If the bottom bricks, if the basic foundational bricks of stability and mental health aren't there. So,
yeah, great point. Thanks, Ann.
Mm-hmm.
Some of this may look familiar because I actually took this from NAMI data. I'm so grateful that you guys put this together when I was putting together my presentation. Because I think, I've lived in Texas long enough to know that Texans like to see what's going on in Texas. Like, yeah, so what about the rest of the world? But like, what are we dealing with here? And I think we all know we're dealing with a lot of mental health challenges, especially with access to care. And so this map on the left actually shows our mental health shortage zones. You can see here in DFW, I live in Richardson. We're doing okay in terms of the amount of resources. I think we're dealing with a lot of things like wait lists. Still a lot of inequality with individuals getting care for when they have Medicaid and some of the smaller commercial insurances. But gosh, you go out 20, 30, you go to this, panhandle section of the state, and there are very few resources, right? We know that Texans are over 5 times more likely to be forced out of network for mental health care, for primary mental health. And that's, most adolescent programming here in Texas is substance use primary. I don't know if you're aware of that. Most mental health primary are attached to hospitals. Most of the residential programs, if not all of them that are specifically for adolescents, are going to be substance use primary. And so when families are looking at placing their child for care for really mental health, and maybe not even, coping with the use of a substance, they're really oftentimes having to look out of state. And so that just increases costs and really decreases the accessibility for a lot of Texans. 314,000 Texans aged 12 to 17 have depression. It's a huge number. But what is so scary is that 64.7% of those Texans who were diagnosed with depression did not receive any care last year. And I will tell you, this is one state, right? Like we live in one state, but a lot of the country is dealing with this very same thing. You'll see a lot of partial hospitalization, intensive outpatient programs scattered in like around metropolitan areas, but very few in rural communities. And when I had just taught you all earlier is we know that the right level of care can be instrumental in getting an adolescent and a young person, an adult, really healed and the skills they need from their mental health. So, of course, I wanted to educate you a little bit about what we are doing at Charlie Health, and I put our information at the end, and happy to schedule a follow-up call to go deeper and share with you. But Charlie Health was actually really created specifically to address the problem I just mentioned with that map on the other slide. Our founders collectively spent essentially their entire adult careers in residential adolescent treatment. Saw a lot of disparities that we just mentioned. A lot of times, they were up against wait lists. They could only help as many youth that their facilities would allow. I also told you a little bit earlier about residential care being pretty costly. And so they saw the financial limitations that caused. But they also saw that as they were discharging youth across the country, they knew that a lot of times the appropriate next level of care would be an intensive outpatient program when they got back home. And more times than not, there weren't any programs available, especially in rural communities. And so we were founded to really solve that problem. We want people to gain access to treatment regardless of geographic and insurance barriers. So in January of 2020, a very important date to remember, we actually launched the first high acuity virtual intensive outpatient program. So we are an all virtual therapy program, really breaking down those barriers to geography and insurance to help individuals age 12 to 30 get the right level of care for them. So our program is really tailored to our clients. It is intensive, like I mentioned. So it is 9 to 11 hours a week, all virtual. 9 of those hours are in groups. So 3 hours a day, 3 times a week. Our programming is Monday through Thursday and on Saturday. We're really trying to make sure that this is accessible to families. Our adolescent programming all occurs in the evening so they can still stay in school. And then our young adult programming occurs throughout the day to match the needs of the clients. So how does it work, right? We get a lot of questions, but gosh, how does virtual therapy work in a group setting? 11 hours seems like a long time. Yes, we totally get it. But what we know is when we can place adolescents and young adults in groups with others who are like them, their engagement levels go way up. So one of the coolest things about being part of Charlie Health and being virtual across state lines is this ability to especially curate groups. And so what I mean is, in most instances pre-COVID, all intensive outpatient programs were done in person. And so it really is limited to who are those 8 to 12 adolescents. Do they all have the same primary diagnosis? They're all here at the same time. We need to throw them together in a group. And that works, right? I think that's better than nothing. But what we know, especially here in Texas, and what I just educated you all on about substance use primary, is oftentimes what would happen is you'd have an adolescent girl with sexual trauma who may be coping with the use of alcohol in a group with an adolescent male who is stepping down from a higher level of care for, severe addiction. And is there room for them to heal together in the same group? Absolutely. That's not my argument. But if insurance is only paying for 4 weeks for that adolescent girl and she doesn't have the time in that therapy to get to that underlying sexual trauma, what does that leave with? And I saw that often when I was in the alternative school setting. And when I first heard about Charlie Health, I was like, gosh, this makes so much sense, because it's hard to find 6 to 8 kiddos who are pretty similar, all here in DFW, who need therapy at the same time. But when you open it up to, 13 different states, you can get pretty specific. We actually had an adolescent girls group. They all had underlying sexual trauma. They were referred to us for marijuana use from their primary care physician, and they all had blue hair. So imagine if you're a girl, blue hair, You live in rural Idaho and rural Wyoming and rural Texas, and you've had this horrible thing happen to you, right? And you're anxious about virtual therapy, but you sign on and, there are 6 other girls that look just like me. It's that type of connection that we're looking for at Charlie Health, because we know if people can be surrounded by those who are like them, and get the right evidence-based care, they can heal together, which is pretty cool. And so we are really here, and our goal is to, serve this gap. So yes, we are a great fit for what I was talking about, those patients in crisis, those individuals who find themselves in a higher level of care, an inpatient stay, a stabilization. Our goal is that we can educate those behavioral health hospitals that rather than discharging them straight to once a week therapy, that they step them down to a program like ours, an intensive outpatient program. But really my mission in my community is educating those individuals that we can really be a proactive solution as well. So educating those individual therapists, the school counselors, that if you're noticing something going on, stepping up from outpatient care into an intensive outpatient program could be the solution that saves an individual from needing that higher level of care. Anything else you want to add, Anne, about Charlie Health in particular?
No, I guess, yes, I just wanted to tell you some of the other specific groups when Gyan is talking about curating groups for kids. We have, I think, 5 or 6 groups right now for LGBTQIA youth. We've got the women's trauma group. We've got a recovering from bullying group. So those are the kinds of things that, like Gyan said, make kids feel more comfortable when they're able to put in a group that is fit more specifically for them. And I'm going to look to see, we have 23 adolescent groups that run at the same time. So we've got a lot of groups. So we have an older DBT group. If you guys know about DBT, very specific skills. We have younger kids that are doing DBT. We've got substance abuse groups. We've got, so those are just some of the specific groups that we've got going on. I just wanted to list a couple more of them for you.
Yeah. No, thank you. I'm happy you were talking, because it just made me realize I forgot to point out a very key thing. So I was talking about geographic barriers. But one of the things we are also incredibly passionate about as a company is the ability to break down insurance barriers. So our goal as a company is to be payer agnostic, meaning we want to be able to work with all commercial insurances and all Medicaid. And here in Texas, we've been really fortunate. We are in network with many of the Medicaid plans, and we've had a lot of success with getting single case agreements and with others, and close to being final with a few more. So really being able to provide intensive outpatient therapy for adolescents and young adults who historically haven't had the availability because of Medicaid. And thank you, Anne, for answering that question. This is why tag teaming is so helpful. Okay, so kind of back to the presentation. So I think we could all argue there's still a stigma, and our mental health care system is slightly broken. Insurance plays a big role in it. Where treatment is placed is often decided on money and things like that. But I think we want to get to the point where we start telling ourselves, our youth, our communities, that it's okay to not be okay, right? Our generation was very much taught to not talk about feelings. There's still, I'm first generation American. My family is from Belgium. My grandma was very much like we don't talk about our feelings outside of this home. Like, this is a private matter. We'll deal with things privately. And I know a lot of cultures deal with that today, and the stigma around talking about mental health. I think here in Texas too, I don't think we would argue that it's very much a pull up your bootstrap type mentality. But we're getting there, right? Like, the more we have these conversations, the more the organizations like NAMI are out there spreading the word, the better we're going to get. But I think we can, a lot of people argue, is it the fact that there's lack of resources? Is it the fact that most are not covered by mental health care plans? Is it the stigma? For me, it really doesn't matter which one it is. It's the fact that the communities who are not getting the care the most are just not able to access it. And so that's something that we all have to work towards as a society, and making sure we're asking the right questions, or if we're a teacher or a counselor, making sure that we're being inclusive of the resources we're providing. I know you mentioned that, Claudia, you are bilingual. That's really important to us too, right? Like, for people to be able to heal with others, and to have therapists that speak their language, to have therapists that have lived and shared experience. That's really important for us as an organization as well. And making sure that we provide resources and accessibility to individuals who speak different languages as well. So some of the things, that we can think of overscheduled life. When I was talking to the school counselors yesterday, we were naming them, and it was interesting because all of them talk about, the sports or the extra club, or, an SAT practice section. And what they all quickly jumped to was this idea of those things are chosen activities that can be taken off. But I think it's also really important when we are talking with communities or thinking of our own lives, that some of these overscheduled pieces aren't by choice, and can't as easily be taken away as an extra sport. A lot of our youth who are struggling, may have parents who are really busy. They have schedules, they work night shifts. They may be tasked with taking care of their sibling. They may be babysitting. They may have to work to support their family, right? I think a lot of our youth had to step up in the last couple of years and figure out how they can also be a contributing member of their family and financially. And so it's easy for us to say that, gosh, take away these activities and focus the time on therapy. But it's important to note that some of those things are challenging, and which is why we were really cognizant when we were building our programming and our timing, to make sure that we were taking that into account, making sure that we had Saturday availability for individuals who found it difficult to get to an IOP Monday through Thursday. So it's just organizations like ours need to be aware of those things, and how can we make it more accessible from a time frame as well. Yeah, absolutely, Claudia. And so I like to talk about post-secondary stressors too, right? Because I was talking about this idea of giving our youth the support they need in high school before they go off to post-secondary life. I think a buzzword lately, and I don't know if it was just because I lived in the world of education for so long, but this idea of failure to launch really has become a term that a lot of people talk about. This idea of, 23, 24, 25-year-olds flunking out of college or not going and not being able to, I can paint a picture of like you're in your parents' basement and you're playing video games all day. And why is that, right? There's lots of, I think, societal things that point to that. I mentioned earlier, we as a society do a really good job of pepping our youth, saying that, you put all this hard work in these 4 years of high school so that you can get to college and you can do all these things and you can have a good job and a good life. And I think if all of us as adults, talk more openly about our own experiences in college, maybe you didn't have a linear path like some of your peers. I think if more of us can talk about that, the more likely our youth are to get a real clearer picture of what post-secondary life could look like. Because it's a lot, there's time, there's moving out for the first time, there's budgeting, there's the expectations of what happiness can look like, right? It's a lot. So I think if we can be more cognizant of the message we're sharing with our youth, the more likely they are to have just a realistic picture. And Anne, I'm going to kick it to you now.
All right. So some of this we've talked about a little bit, but on the left is just factors that can shape the mental health of young people. There are so many different things. So as you as an organization seem like you are on top of doing so many things for your community. I think NAMI has come so far since I was involved with it many, many years ago. So it's a combination of looking at society and the environment, the community, family, and individuals. And how are you as an organization and how are you as an individual feeling that you can impact mental health of young people? And it can't be in all of these ways. So what makes sense for you, right? Your organization, your personality, your family, the time that you have to volunteer, where you work, all of those kinds of things. What we know is that the power of connection and relationship is more important than anything to youth, than anything. What we know is isolation and the feelings of being isolated is leading to them killing themselves. And so connection is really, people have talked about connection. The first time I really heard about connection and a mental health issue is when somebody, and I don't know who ended up saying this, it was years ago, that the opposite of addiction is connection. And you're like, oh, right. Yeah, that makes sense. The opposite of addiction is connection. The opposite of isolation is connection. And the opposite of poor mental health or mental illness is connection. So even when I do interviews for therapists for Charlie Health, they ask about the curriculum. And I say, listen, we've got a great curriculum, evidence-based curriculum, strength-based curriculum. We see our kids, we hear our kids, they know that we care. And if you are in the middle of the best curriculum and a kid says, hey, you know what, last night, my parents got into a fight and I think they're going to get divorced and it's really tearing me apart. I don't care if you get to the rest of the curriculum, because I want our therapists to know that that is a moment for what we call horizontal cohesion. That's a moment to say, hold on. Peyton just said something really important. Tell us more about what you're thinking about, Peyton, and then tell us, whoever else might be in the group, has anybody else had their parents get a divorce? Does anybody else's parents fight? How can we support Peyton and how can we form this cohesion? And that at this point becomes the most important thing. So for us to say, that sounds sad, Peyton, but we need to get back to this curriculum, even if you say it in the nicest way, is not what we're about. Connection is the most important part and relationship is the most important part. And there's certain ways, and I just put a couple of them here, certain terms that people can use, parents can use, adults can use to show kids and to show young adults that we really see and hear them. Because oftentimes I think we are about our own agenda. I just want to make sure you vacuum the floor. That's really what's important to me right now, that you're doing what your obligations are. And I'm not saying that it's not important for kids to have responsibilities at home, but I am saying that it's important for them to be seen and heard and not just be told all the things that they need to do and all the things that they're doing wrong. And some of the ways that that can happen is by saying things like these. So I went to school today and I skipped a class because somebody in the class is bullying me and da, 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 da. So I'm a real fan of this. That's important information, or that's good information, because what it shows is I'm not judging and I'm listening. I'm listening to you. So that's important information. I'm curious instead of a judgmental kind of response. Well, why didn't you go to school? Or da, da, da. I'm curious, when did you start experiencing this, and digging deeper that way? Help me understand, because they don't feel understood. Whether you think they should or not is another thing. Youth oftentimes don't feel understood, and that leads to depression worsening and isolation. So help me understand what's really happening or how you really feel, even though the feeling might not seem to make sense with the situation that they're talking about. Help me understand. And also reflective listening, which is, so what I'm hearing is you were so anxious, your stomach started hurting before you went to class. And so you decided that you just couldn't go. Is that right? Reflective listening. So there's just a few things. kind of non-judgmental ways that you can talk with kids, even if they're saying really hard things. So that's connection in person. There's also connection to the outdoors. So we used to think the people that were in like experiential, they would, do wilderness therapy, and, that's great. That's awesome. And there wasn't any really evidence-based statistics to show how important that really is, being outside. Well, now there is a lot of data that shows being in green places makes a huge difference to your mental health, being near grass and trees and outside and in the fresh air. So that is evidence-based. And I remember years ago when a therapist that I had worked with, he was a younger therapist, and I was kind of a mentor to him at one point. He had started a private practice, and he told me that he would go walking with his clients. This was years ago. And I was like, what? You're not just sitting in a room? Because that's what you did when you did therapy. Now there's a lot more understanding of how beneficial that can really be. So getting kids outside. Another kind of connection, and we'll talk about this in the next slide, is connecting to their bodies. I had just the other day, I had some therapists that were saying, I've got kids with some ADHD symptoms. It's really hard for them to focus in group. I'm like, when I ran my last group at Charlie Health, when I stepped in when the therapist wasn't available, I had them get up, jump around, do some jumping jacks, because what we know about ADHD is that you have to move your body to be able to focus your mind. And at the last organization I worked with before this, we had a little gym, and we'd have kids get in there and do the bike. They would just get on the bike, and then go into therapy. And it was much easier for them to focus. So moving their bodies is really, really important. Not just perhaps during group or an activity, because you can do that virtually, believe it or not. But what are they doing outside of therapy to move their bodies? Really, really important. And then starting young, we're talking about teens and we're talking about young adults, because that's kind of the focus of what we're talking about now. But, more and more elementary schools are talking about meditation, how to relax your mind, and how to practice these de-escalating yourself and all of these kinds of things. So the earlier that we can start getting to these, the more people are going to have practiced them when they get to high school and college. So I'm a real fan of starting that yoga and mindfulness and mental health wellness when they're young.
And Anne, before we go to the next slide, this was a question I'm not sure how to answer. Do clinicians go over the 8 dimensions of wellness with our patients at Charlie Health?
I am not familiar exactly with what that might be. I can guess, but I'm not sure. Chris, do you want to talk about that? Tell me what the ones are that you're thinking of.
So the 8 dimensions of wellness is something that SAMHSA put out a few years back, talking about the 8 areas of our everyday life that have an effect on our mental health. And you're talking about the environment and social connections and stuff like that. Those are some of the 8 dimensions of wellness that were identified. So I was wondering if that was something that was actually gone over with the students and reviewed with the students, or if that was something that y'all it was a completely foreign, or not foreign, but outside concept that y'all just integrated in that, and not realizing that it was part of the 8 dimensions of wellness. I was just wondering what was the process of coming to these conclusions about this type of training.
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes. So we are an organization we have a whole team of creative arts specialists. I'm sure that we hit all 8 dimensions. So I wasn't familiar with exactly that terminology, and I know that SAMHSA has done some great studies on that. But we deal with the whole holistic approach for sure. We do music therapy, we do drama therapy, we do art therapy. And that's not only part of that, but and family, school, all of that. So I'm pretty sure that we hit all of them, but I'd like to see a list of that. I just wrote a note for me to look that up. Thank you for mentioning that.
I'm curious, Chris, I wonder if that correlates. I know there's I think psychiatrists can have like a specialty or an extra like degree in like lifestyle medicine, which talks about, I want to say I've heard that in relationship to the 8 dimensions of wellness, and they look at sleep and things like that. I don't know if that's the same thing, but I wrote it down too to look up.
Yeah, sleeping, eating. Yeah, I want to make sure that we're covering all of those for sure. So in talking about self-regulation, I don't know how many of you know about dialectical behavior therapy. It's kind of under the umbrella of cognitive behavioral therapy. And just to give a brief overview, cognitive behavioral therapy is you change your thinking and you change your behavior. That's pretty much it, very much in a nutshell. But it is an evidence-based practice where folks work through a number of exercises and in treatment to change their thinking, and then they can change their feelings and their behavior with that in mind. Now, DBT was developed specifically actually for folks that have a personality disorder called borderline personality disorder. And it also works for everybody. So it's evidence-based for borderline personality disorder and for other mental health issues as well. The 4 pieces of that, so DBT kind of fits under cognitive behavioral therapy, also evidence-based, and there's 4 sections of that. Mindfulness, of course, being in the present, emotion regulation, interpersonal effectiveness, and distress tolerance. And I think any of us as human beings can probably figure out what we do best out of those 4, what we might need to do better out of those 4. And so we do a lot of DBT work in our groups. And that's something that I would encourage you as a lay person, if you're not a mental health professional, to Google and to search out and to see some of the exercises, the workbooks that are available that are really very powerful in terms of being able to help in these 4 areas. Does anybody have any experience with DBT or anything that they wanted to add about that? Okay. So there's a lot to mindfulness, and that's another thing that used to be kind of woo-woo, like yoga and like going outside. It is evidence-based at this point that, being in the present will actually help your central nervous system, help you calm down, listening to music, noticing and not judging. Those kinds of things are some of the things that are part of mindfulness. And it's not easy to do for busy minds either. Sometimes it takes some practice. It always takes some practice to do mindfulness in a good way, in a beneficial way. So we're not telling kids that they've gone through the worst, and we're going to try to help them get through what they've already been through, and that they're going to be okay going forward. And that's why I kind of like the it's okay not to be okay, because there are always going to be challenges. We're teaching kids how to get through them. That's the resilient piece. So what can I call on that I have learned? Who can I call on that I know that can help me move past this situation and be able to be okay? The thing about suicide is that that's the opposite of this. This will never end. I cannot get through. And so I just wanted to kind of mention that. I don't hear that mentioned a lot. What we're doing is bombarding kids and repeating skills. And I say bombarding, it sounds terrible, but sometimes people say, well, I've already heard this skill. Well, how many times does it take you to implement something that you've learned? Sometimes it takes a while, right? And so we want them to be able to learn from each other too. It's not just us being a facilitator. When I hear group facilitators saying, I like the group to run itself, basically, that's a good thing, because they can learn from themselves a lot of beautiful ways to get through with us as guides, and not just being the ones that are teaching all the time. So it's really important that they get that experience, because where kids are now and where they've always been is if a teenager hears, don't touch this, what do? Want to touch it. I'm the same way. It's like, that's it. Exactly. It's like, there, I'm going to touch it because you said not to touch it. And so we want them to be teaching themselves how to get through. And what's beautiful about the IOP groups is that they remain stable, but they're open groups. So there's always going to be new kids coming in, and there's always going to be closing circles, which is a beautiful kind of ceremony that we do when kids graduate from Charlie Health. So there's always kids at the beginning, in the middle, and at the end of treatment, so they can really learn from each other that whole way. So we provide opportunities to practice skills. And this is something that I tell, obviously teachers, parents, anybody working with youth, give them the opportunities to practice them, model self-regulation ourselves, right? So we've got parents that say to us, my kid, and I'm like, look at you, right? And I'm not saying that they're not parenting well. They're parenting the best that they can. And they might need some different skills themselves to regulate so that their child can come down also. So it's not out of the ordinary at all for us to say to parents, you've got a difficult situation on your hands in your marriage, in your family, with your child. Have you ever thought about getting some help for yourself? We are not in the business of telling parents they don't know what they're doing with their kids. They've been told that enough, and they feel enough guilt and shame about things that have happened in their parenting lives. We're not in the business of telling our kids that they do bad things because they've been told that. We don't need to tell them that. What we need to do is look for their strengths and give them skills and support them as a family and become those protective factors. Because if they know that we care, there's every chance in the world that somebody else out there is going to care about them in the future. So opportunities to practice skills, modeling self-regulation, providing a safe place for mistakes. So sometimes families can get, and mine did too. I have 2 recovering addicts children who are 26 and 27. So I was a clinical director of a psych hospital when they were going through their addiction. So everybody has their stuff, right? So, I know that you can get into this. They did something wrong again and wrong again and wrong again. And it just kind of becomes this pattern, but trying to provide a safe place for mistakes and understanding those can go a long way with kids and youth. And then reinforcing their successes. And when they do use skills, even if it's just a little bit, even if they just said, okay, I'll breathe for a minute. And they just went, great. You want to recognize the skills that they do use and then ask them to talk to you about that. And then, practice these skills, ask them what they're doing and you practice them too. That's great. They'd love to see that. I think one of the most powerful things that kids can hear from us is that we see that their whole family needs some help. It's not just them. That's really great because a lot of times they've been told that they're the ones, So anything else about that? Any feedback about any of that? You can tell I get into this. I love this subject. Okay. So what can communities do? And you guys do a lot. So I just tried to throw some things in here that I don't know if you've considered, and you may have. So first, you're all about talking about mental health issues, right? So talk about them in your families, talking about them to the degree that you feel comfortable by providing, I say, Me Too moments. Like I just said, I've got 2 kids out of 2 that are recovering alcoholics. They're doing great right now. That might not be your story, but when I tell people that, they say, and I've got this, right? You guys have heard these, right? And I've got an uncle that, I've got a father that, I went through this, but it opens the door. And so especially like what you said, Claudia, earlier, I think in minority families, in marginalized communities that really do not, in different cultures that do not talk about mental health as readily as other people do. When you open your mouth and you say what's happened to you, it makes them not feel alone. And so to the degree you feel comfortable providing these Me Too moments, I think that's really very, very powerful. So providing, and just so you know too, my girls are huge proponents of me talking about their experience anywhere if it makes sense for me to do so, because they know the power of sharing. They're big AA women, and they know the power of sharing and how that can really be helpful and healing for people. Providing community resources and events. You guys already referenced this earlier. Athena, you talked about this, about having story time and having people in your community come and share their stories and have that be a safe place for them to do that. And I think there's some boundaries that, and I'd be happy to help with this another time if you wanted to, but that we could guide that a little bit so it's not like a triggering kind of thing. But when people tell their stories, that's really powerful. When you have mental health professionals come and speak, I don't know if there's a mental health section in the library that you can let people know about, or there's other community areas like coffee shops. Like, I have never seen this, but what about if coffee shops had some mental health resources there? Coffee shops are huge right now. People spend a lot of time there. And that, I think, could be really helpful. And then I just thought of this kind of out of the blue, but providing a speaker on navigating insurance. And you kind of talked a little bit, Athena, about a speaker that you just had recently that was about kind of financial stuff. But people get very confused because it's very confusing about what the different levels of care are, what my insurance covers, what does this mean, copay, you know, how to even start with insurance. And, you know, when I was trying to find the best treatment programs for my kids, I am smack dab in the middle of the field. I have a ton of people that I know that are in treatment, and I still was not a professional then. I was a mom. And so I needed other people to guide me through some things. And so insurance was actually one of them. And now I can do, you know, I could have done seminars for other people, but it just wasn't clicking to me. So, you know, I think that's important too. Talking to teachers and coaches about prioritizing treatment. And we talked about this a little bit. I've seen things on both ends of the spectrum where coaches are like, you know what, if you're not here 5 days a week after school, then you're not going to be on this team. And that does happen. Remember the bricks though at the bottom. Yes, he wants to play football. And yes, he wants to do well in school. And if this depression continues, that is falling down. You are not going to be able to play the game. You're not going to be able to succeed at school. So let's look at priorities in that way, and educating coaches and teachers. And a lot of them are getting so much better about saying, you know what, come to practice twice a week instead of 5 times, do your treatment. I love to hear that. And more people are doing that. More and more teachers are doing that. More and more coaches are doing that. Provide youth-free journals. That's just an idea I thought about. Writing and not typing. Writing, going from brain to hand to paper, is also an evidence-based way to calm down and get out thoughts. So that might be something that might fit into something that you want to do individually with your families or with your community. And then we talked about this. Assess the inclusivity of your efforts. So whatever you're doing, say, you know, think, could this be helpful to low income, marginalized groups, multicultural groups, LGBTQIA, any of these groups, because we don't want them on the periphery. That's why they're marginalized. We want to bring them in. And how is what we're doing inclusive? Give yourselves credit for being a part of a solution. You guys are all here because you want to learn about mental health, and everybody who learns something about mental health is going to be more important to somebody else. So what we know is that we can gather statistics like Jan has about kids who have thought about suicide or have reported that they've thought about it, or who, you know, successfully, not even successfully, I hate saying that way, but have ended up killing themselves. We know about some of those statistics. What we don't know is who we're saving. We can't measure that. We can't measure the fact that any of you are going to do something that we talked about today or something else for a kid who needs it, and it stops them from doing that. So just remember that. We can't count what that statistic looks like, but we know how powerful it is. So we know that's why each of you, you just don't know when you're saving somebody's life. And so small things can mean everything. So thank you for everything that you do in NAMI. That's a great organization, and the ways that you've shared your own stories, and for being here.
Thanks so much, Ann. And here are just some of the resources, a lot of where we pulled the data from. and then contact information for Ann and myself. Like I said, we are really more than happy to answer any questions, share more information about organization, and here to help. Any questions?
You all should be able to unmute yourselves, and you don't have to do it through the chat. We've got few enough people here that we can just have a discussion afterwards. Even just share your story if you want to.
I think I have found that the Montessori curriculum is easier for children with the health situations. It's not as stressful. I'm on a board of a Montessori school.
Great.
Yeah, I've had a lot of students have a lot of success with Montessori, and just the ability to kind of freely move through curriculum and space in school. And yeah, thanks for sharing.
I'll jump in real. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Ann.
No, I was just going to say, I would be curious to know if there's anything that anybody heard that was that they had to kind of like, oh, really? Or kind of a aha thing.
That's kind of what I was going to mention, actually. My background, I have 25 years in academia, working in student affairs and as an adjunct professor before coming to NAMI. And it was interesting. I worked so closely with the counseling centers because I worked with international students and with the multicultural and underrepresented students. And so we were making referrals to the counseling center all the time, and we knew all the resources that were there. And so I guess when Gian was saying something about not knowing the resources were there and not accessing the resources, or the counseling center wasn't enough, or they weren't, making the appropriate referrals. I guess when I was in that realm, it felt like everything was, I'm not, a licensed therapist or anything, but it felt like they were getting the help that they needed. I guess where are, college and university counseling centers falling short? Because I know one of our board members, she actually oversees the counseling center at North Central Texas College. Courtney, you may have a similar question as you were hearing that.
I mean, I can share a little bit. One of the things my coworker and I have been doing that we're really passionate about is talking with college students face to face. And we've actually had the privilege of talking with some sororities at UT Austin. And it's fascinating because we had the same question, right? Like, more than ever, colleges have employed more counselors. They've messaged it out. And what we heard from a lot of the young women that we were talking to is this fear of going to see the college counselor because in some way that would show up on their portal or be accessible to their parents. And that was the anonymity was a big thing that the girls were coming to us to talk about. So I don't know if that's something that is true or not in when they seek out help, but overarching, that was the common thread that I heard. And just like I mentioned, the anonymity, the girls really liked this idea specifically of Charlie Health of getting to be in their own room and in their dorm and sign on with kids from other parts of the country, not necessarily having to walk in to the counseling center or wait lists. And so I know that is a narrow view because it's sororities at UT Austin, but that was interesting that those were some of the themes I was hearing over and over again.
Yeah, I think that's also kind of, I guess, mixed things. And sorry, Bluey's in the background, but so at NCTC, the college has contracted with an outside company. And so all of our students are eligible for free virtual medical counseling, health coaching, all that stuff at NCTC's expense. And so even with that, our utilization rates though are, I think, kind of low. And I know some students that I've talked to about, you know, telling them like, hey, you have access to this stuff. Sometimes it is that fear of, but are people going to know that I'm doing this? And I'm like, no. And like, even if the company has to communicate with us about someone, because they can be referred for psychiatric services through the company, but we have to approve the psychiatric services because we only get a certain amount and all that stuff. And so even at that, like they just send us initials and like why they want to refer for psychiatric services. So we still don't even know who the person is. And so it's super anonymous, and we send out like notices about it and like, hey, you have access to this. And we have flyers posted all around campus. We put stuff out on our social media about it. But then I would still say most of the students that I end up talking to be like, hey, you have access to this and it's free. They'll be like, oh, I didn't even know. We put it everywhere. We've only had it for a year. Like January was just a year that we've had it. So, but yeah, it's like them noticing that they have it, and then actually using it have still been things we're working on.
I'll give you maybe something that you guys can consider, because we, like I said, we've really been focused on talking directly to the students, because we know if students tell other students, they're more likely to listen. And so we connected with the student body president at UT Austin. And one of her big initiatives is spreading the news about mental health. And she even admitted that she wasn't aware of all the things that her school was doing to bring accessibility to mental health until we started the conversation. Then she started to do research and was like, gosh, all these things have been here all along. How come no one knows about them? And then the counselors were like, it's all around campus. Like, what do you mean you don't know about it? And so one of her ideas was really highlighting those things on their social media, or they have like these little podcasts they do. So I don't know if it's, you know, finding those couple students who are really passionate about mental health themselves and making them push out the information to their peers could be a way to get the college students listening that these things do exist for them and they're just not being utilized.
You know, that is a good idea to maybe have the student spokespeople. Thank you.
Do you know what? I have another thought, is that, you know, if the students who have benefited from mental health services, there's got to be a pocket of people that are going to be okay with maybe doing something really fun for the campus and not making it about mental health, but it's sponsored by them or sponsored by the behavioral health, whatever it's called at the school. And they're just doing something super fun. And so it engages people to come, and then they just know that that's, you know what I'm trying to say? Like, yeah, they just do something fun. It doesn't have to do with mental health at all. It's like free bowling or whatever, you know, I don't know what it is. That's probably an old fashioned thing to do, but yeah, just by sponsoring them and having people available to talk to and seeing that they're real people and just like sponsoring something like that. It doesn't have to be like about depression. Yeah.
Right. I think also very important is the training of people at the college level, especially the campus police. They were the safety net that caught my son during a very severe break with reality. And I do find that term failure to launch really appropriate for him. And I think men in general, college age men, kind of hit the wall sometimes. And that's where my son did. And if the policeman hadn't been trained to be sensitive to that, I mean, we could have had a totally different scenario. But my son was walking around in a circle muttering. He had no shoes on and, you know, whatever. And he could just tell he was troubled. And so he, talked to him a little bit, and then he decided, yeah, this guy is troubled. And so he was about 5'6", and my son is about 6'3". And so he was trying to think, how do I get him in the car and, perhaps handcuffs or something. But he did. He got him in the car and he got handcuffs on him for I don't know how, but anyway. And as he talked to him, he knew so then they called me at home. And this was, he was in college at Corpus Christi. So, they functioned. And I said, yes, take him to a hospital.
Mhm.
And that's where, he really did come unglued and so on and so forth. And wound up with him being in the state hospital. But I want to say that the campus people are, when they are trained, and many of them are now, because that's such a common time for people to have trouble like that. And if they can just discern that it's not, well, the hard part is it drugs or is it alcohol? They do have those two thoughts first. But then the third one that comes in is mental health. And if they've had that training, they can be sensitized to it. And so I say that above all else, that that provided a safety net, and it worked for my son. That was what got him into treatment. I mean, he never would have gone in on his own. And then, somewhat of a recovery. But it was brutal. It was a brutal time. And,
Thank
I
you.
guess that's the end of what I want to say.
Thank you for sharing that.
I think
Yeah.
something going along those lines is when you kind of think about your typical college age student, a lot of them are looking for mentors or people that they can have in their lives that is someone that they can turn to for help. And I know for a lot of students, especially earlier when you're talking about, addiction is the absence of connection, and they're looking for connections in their life. A lot of them will look to their professors. So I think, not just, what Joanne mentioned with the law enforcement, I think getting the entire faculty and administration involved and, kind of that push for mental health wellness is going to be very critical for a lot of students. And then, of course, combining that with, Ann's idea of, those events that are done on campus that, you can get the faculty involved. I know there'll be all sorts of students lined up to pie their favorite professor in the face or something like that. And if it's all with the idea of promoting good mental wellness, I think there'll be a lot of interactions and a lot of conversations that could be had both in and out of the classroom if you have your faculty behind that.
Agreed. Next point.
Can I add a little bit to that? Chris, this is Rebecca. I've been working in education my whole life. I've worked at all three levels, elementary, middle school, and high school. And being able to connect with them is such an important thing, of course, but also knowing, especially in minority communities, that a lot of times we have all this information and we expect them to come to us, but we have to be mindful that we have to make the effort to go to them. Some of my most successful connections have been out in the community, not at the school level. Me going out there, being able to, have somebody that can speak their language, that can connect with them, like you said, and not necessarily in a scenario of talking about mental health. It can just be a, community fair or something fun, but having that opportunity to then be in their place, connect with them, and then after that, then inviting them back to the school to do activities. But taking that initial step a lot of times breaks a lot of the barriers and then makes them feel at ease that, okay, now I can at least, when I look at the school, when I look at the college or whatever, I can remember that person from the park or from that event, and I can go to them, and it makes it less intimidating to make that initial contact versus walking into any building for that matter. And it's like, I don't even know where to start or who do I ask for? So, how do we provide those opportunities in our community to us make that connection first? Because right now we are the ones that are comfortable talking about it, right? Because we're in this setting. So using that to reach out and make that first connection, and then inviting them after that to connect with us, and then showing the resources.
Right. Yeah. Developing trust. Nice. Thank you.
Okay. And We are at 8:32 right now, so I want to just recognize everybody's time. We say this is 7 to 8:30, so we are happy to sit here and, you know, continue to discuss this. If there are more questions or anything like that, I would like to highlight one piece of the presentation where I think NAMI is really good about empowering people to tell their story. We have various ways of training you to make it powerful and empowering yourself and helping it be part of your own recovery process for family members as well as peers. We have share your story with law enforcement. We try to have at each one of those, the trainings for law enforcement officers, a parent as well as a peer who have had either positive or negative experiences with law enforcement, because these new police officers, they're going to go out and patrol and they're going to have positive and negative experiences themselves. So there's a new program called Share Your Story with Law Enforcement. We have In Our Own Voice that helps empower you and helps you come. All of these are about 10 minutes, turning your story into a 10-minute reflection of empowerment and sharing, helping people understand what your point of view is. And then, gosh, it's leading, there's another one where we, Ending the Silence, where we have young adults, 18 to 25, share their story with middle school and high schoolers as part of an Ending the Silence presentation. And we are always looking for more people. We are getting, especially the Ending the Silence presentations, we are getting an enormous amount of requests, and we've got a handful of people, and you know, they're stepping up every single time we need them, but we also don't want to burn that handful of people out. So if anybody's interested in being part of that process, and it helps you just as much as you're helping everybody else, just let us know. Chris is in charge of making sure you get properly trained and working with you. Rebecca says she'd love to help with Ending the Silence. Rebecca, you can private message Chris your email address, and we'll have our youth programs coordinator, Felicia Wadsworth, reach out to you. So you're welcome to you, or if anybody you know, just call us. Any one of us at the office can help you.
I also just wanted to let you know, yeah, it's so powerful to tell your own story. And I wanted to just let you know that we have hired a group of peer advisors that are available every time groups are running, so that if it's appropriate and a kid we feel needs to talk with somebody, sometimes it could be a clinical director they need to talk to, sometimes it could be a case manager. But these young people that work for Charlie Health have stories of their own, and that's why we hired them, so that they can come to this kiddo and pull them out of a group, put them in a side room, a breakout room, if they're having a struggle, and talk with them and in the way that they've been trained. But they're really powerful because it's not their therapist, it's a peer advisor. So just wanted to let you know that they're really great at what they do and how they show up for kids.
So I went ahead and dropped my email in the chat if anyone is interested in one of the programs. Anyone who's watching online later who does not have access to the chat, the email is ChrisP, CHRISP, not like crispy bacon, but ChrisP at NAMINorthTexas.org.
Awesome.
Great.
Thank you all so much. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Great.
Thank you, Gian and Ann, for sharing all your wonderful wisdom with us. With each one of these, and everybody who comes, we grow each day and we learn each day. And thank you everybody for joining us. Just letting you all know that if you know anybody who wanted to be here and wasn't able to make it for some reason, as soon as we're done, I will be uploading this recording to our YouTube channel, and I will have it hopefully up by tomorrow. And I believe we're sending a newsletter out tomorrow. If you're not on our newsletter list, send me your email through the chat. I'll get you on tonight, and I'll try to get this link into that newsletter before it goes out tomorrow. Otherwise, it'll be on our website, or you can search YouTube to find our channel, NAMI MT.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you.
thank you, everyone.
Great night, everyone, and stay warm.
Yes, stay warm, be safe.
Yep.